I hauled my butt to the laundromat on a typical gray Sunday morning at 7. I had no idea if it was a gray day outside, but I guess that's how everyone feels when they find themselves at the laundromat on a Sunday morning. I've only been using the laundromat service for the last year or so. Before that, my wife did her laundry in our own laundry room in the basement of our house. About a year ago, I moved, and 6 months ago, my wife became my ex-wife, and the laundromat was now located in my former home. So early Sunday morning, I headed out to the laundromat, which is about a mile from my apartment. While I don't really like getting up early to do laundry, I didn't want this ritual to interfere with my weekend, so I arrived at the laundromat early and left early. I avoided the hassle of waiting for a machine on a busy day and was courteous to other visitors. After all, isn't Sunday morning meant for hangovers and quietly reading the paper? I'd been going to the same laundromat for the past 9 months or so, and had probably seen her before but never really paid attention to her. But this time was different. One of the wheels of the cart she was pulling seemed to be a little bent, causing the cart to roll unevenly. It was piled high with dirty clothes, and she was having trouble rolling it behind her with one hand while trying to hold the door open with the other. I saw this while looking through the sports section, and being a generally nice guy, I put the paper aside, walked to the door, and held it open like a gentleman while she pulled the cart inside. She looked up at me and gave me a 100-megawatt smile with beautiful white teeth and big brown eyes. "Thanks, mister," she said, and headed toward the row of washing machines against the far wall of the laundry room. I estimated she was about 7 or 8 years old, mixed race or possibly Hispanic, with a mop of long curly brown hair. She was just adorable. I turned around, expecting to see my parents walking behind me, but they were gone. Now I was alarmed and intrigued. I watched the child load the entire stack of clothes into the washing machine, not separating the colored from the white as I had been taught. Then she added some laundry detergent she was carrying in a cart, put the money in the machine, and pressed the start button. She pulled a small teddy bear out of her bag, sat on a chair and talked quietly to it while the washing machine did its work. From my seat almost at the other end of the laundry room, I could see that her clothes, jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, and a pink jacket too light for a 20-degree morning, had seen better days. Though they weren't dirty, they were faded from age and wear. She looked only a step above a street hobo, but there was a calmness in her demeanor that I couldn't quite grasp. I also couldn't believe that parents could send such a young child alone to wash the whole family's clothes. Being a parent myself, I realized that there was something wrong with all of this. It brought me back to my own problems. My children, at this very moment, are probably asleep snuggled together in their warm beds in my former home. When they wake up, probably an hour or two later, their mother, my ex-wife, will probably have a hot breakfast of pancakes, eggs, and maybe bacon ready for them. My 13-year-old son Ethan is a big fan of bacon, and my 15-year-old daughter Haley prefers pancakes. My favorite meal was waffles, but those days of happy Sunday morning breakfast with my family have become a quickly fading memory. As is usually the case in divorce, my wife was awarded custody of the children, and although I was granted some visitation rights, my wife turned the children against me with all her nastiness, blaming my selfishness for the destruction of our family. My children wanted nothing to do with me, and this was quite evident in the few times we were together. My crime? I couldn't bear to watch my wife cuckold another man during a long weekend with 3 other couples, and the man she ended up having sex with, a rich guy who had a habit of having sex with other men's wives. She and he devised a plan whereby they were to have sex for one night and then she would come back to me and be completely faithful to me for the rest of our lives, as she did throughout the weekend. Since she had told me about it beforehand, it wasn't cheating, she claimed. But just in case I wanted to make a fuss, she would take half my money, half my stuff, my entire house, and, as a nuisance, mess up my relationship with my kids, which of course would go to her. When I refused, she got everything she promised and of course blamed it on me. The kids bought it. I was totally screwed. Thinking about those family breakfasts made me hungry, because I hadn't eaten anything since the last sausage had slipped down my throat along with a malted Mickey at the bar where I'd watched the Knicks game. There was a poor imitation of a vending machine hanging on one wall and a Coke machine next to it. I was sure the owner of the laundromat collected money from both machines every day, or they would have been broken into and ruined long ago. I bought a pack of M&Ms and a Diet Coke. Just as I was picking up the can of Coke, I glanced over at the girl. She seemed to be calmly watching me, but then I realized she wasn't looking at me, but at my snacks. Like I said, I'm someone's father. And the look on her face as she looked at my snacks hurt my heart. I walked over to where she was sitting and quietly asked if she wanted a Diet Coke and M&Ms. She visibly brightened and sat up straight in her chair. Then, with a sad expression on her face, she declined my offer. Mommy says I shouldn't take food from strangers, especially men, she explained. That's a very good rule, honey. And you should always listen to what your mom says, I agreed. I'll tell you what, I'll just put a soda and M&Ms on the chair next to you, and you can have them if you want them. And I'll get myself another one and go back to my seat. I set the snacks aside and went back to the vending machines and got myself another Diet Coke and another bag of M&Ms. Then I went back to my seat and picked up a newspaper, surreptitiously watching her from above. After about 5 minutes, she picked up the soda and M&Ms and got down to business. I smiled to myself. I left about 90 minutes later, having folded my 2 loads and stowed them in my car. As I drove away, I didn't think about the baby, immersed in my own life and how I would spend the rest of Sunday. To be honest, I didn't think about the baby until I got to the laundromat the following Sunday, again around 7 in the morning. Then I wondered if she would show up again. Sure enough, about half an hour later, she came to the door, again dragging the clothes cart behind her. I held the door for her again, and after thanking me, she headed for the machines against the far wall. I noticed that she was wearing the same clothes as last week. I waited for her to start loading and then cautiously walked over and sat down on the seat next to her. I see you're having trouble with your rear tire, honey. Is it okay if I try to fix it? She nodded affirmatively, playing with her bear cub. I turned the wagon over and saw that the right rear wheel was bent on the axle. I straightened it with my hands and then rolled the wagon back and forth to check my work. The wagon straightened up instantly. My little friend looked impressed. I'm Alex Rogers, by the way, I said, extending my hand for a handshake. She extended her small hand with all the dignity she was capable of and said in a somber voice, Maddie Ruiz, very pleased to meet you, sir. Well, now that we've introduced ourselves, we're no longer strangers, I said. What do you say to sodas and candy? Can I get a real Coke this week? She asked, looking at me questioningly and opening her eyes wide. Sure, 1 real Coke for you, a Diet Coke for me, and some M&Ms for both of us. We sat and talked for almost 2 hours. I got a notepad and pen out of the car and introduced her to a game of tic-tac-toe. It took her about 5 minutes to get the hang of the game, but then she started to get the hang of it. I let her win a few times like I sometimes let my kids win. For a minute or two, I was immersed in my own little world, thinking about playing with my kids. Then I remembered my then-wife, Tracy, looking me straight in the face and telling me she was going to sleep with Robert Goldstein III, a big city lawyer, the night that ended the life I'd known. It's just one night, Alex. It won't mean anything. It'll just be sex. What, are you kidding me? It won't just be sex. It's going to be the end of our marriage, yelled back at her. Don't be like that, Alex, she shouted back. Don't throw away 18 years of marriage because of one night. I didn't sneak behind your back like I could have. We could have done this and you probably never would have known. Just give yourself to me, Alex. Tracy took Robert's hand and walked away with him to his bedroom in the 4-room cottage. After standing there with my mouth open for what seemed like hours but was probably only a minute, I gathered my things and left. Alex, it's your turn, Maddie said, bringing me back to the present. I had marked an X in one of the side squares, and that gave Maddie a chance to get 3 O's in a row, diagonally, to win. She made her best face of triumph by marking a line through her triple. High five, kid, I said, holding my hand out at arm's length from her. She threw me an oblique glance, then stood up in her chair and reached her hand into mine to complete the high five. Gotcha, she said. I stayed in the laundry room until Maddie's clothes were finished and folded. I offered to give her a ride home, but she said she couldn't accept because it was Mom's rules. Mom is a smart woman. I'd like to meet her sometime, I said. Well, maybe someday. She doesn't get out much, Maddie replied. I continued to chat with Maddie as winter changed to spring and spring to summer. I started packing a small bag with sandwiches for both of us and snacks, and bought a soda from the laundromat. I wasn't particularly hungry at this time, but I figured if I ate a sandwich, she would too, and she was awfully thin. So I started packing an extra sandwich, telling her she could take an extra home for her mom. She never protested and always thanked me. By then, she told me that she was actually 7 years old and would be going into second grade at our neighborhood elementary school in the fall. Her father wasn't home, and, in truth, Maddie told me that she had never seen her father. Her mother apparently worked part-time outside the home while Maddie was in school, though she didn't know what exactly, but by the time Maddie came home from school, she was always home. She and her mother mostly stayed in their apartment, occasionally going out to the park when the weather was nice. Mostly they watched TV, and Maddie was familiar with almost every cartoon that had recently appeared on the children's channels. I couldn't name the first one. There was no money for entertainment, but on Saturdays my mother would sometimes go out, leaving Maddie after dinner with instructions to go to bed at 9 o'clock at night. On Sunday morning, her mother would wake her up, give her money for one washer and one dryer, and send her to the laundromat with her wagon. Truth be told, my life wasn't much better than Maddie's was now, though at least I had enough money to live on. With alimony, mortgage payments, and child support, my salary as a top programmer left little opportunity for extra pastime, usually the occasional sit-down at a bar with my buddies. I didn't date at all. I didn't miss it. I did miss my kids, though. At least until I remembered how they'd treated me after Tracy and I broke up. I preferred to think of happier times with them, but reality always seemed to jump up and bite me. "Where the hell have you been?" yelled Tracy when I picked up the phone in my house the morning after I left Robert Goldstein's house on the lake. The phone was showing 10:06. As far as I knew, it was now 2:13, and I was tipping another shot of Eagle Rare bourbon into myself. I guess I eventually made it to the bedroom and fell asleep. "You left me at the lake house. How do I get home?" She yelled at me again. "Screw you! Let Robert Goldstein III take you home." I hung up the phone while she was still yelling something. Damn, you can't hang up as abruptly with a cell phone as you can with a landline. In the old days, I would have smashed the phone against the wall, slamming it down. The following Sunday, Maddie showed up at the laundromat 15 minutes later than usual and without a bag of clothes. Tears were streaming down her young face, and I thought she must have been mugged. She was carrying her teddy bear, clasping it under her right arm. "Mommy didn't come home last night, and I don't have any money for the washing machine," she said as I approached. "Does she not come home sometimes?" I asked as gently as I could. She shook her head negatively, tears glistening in her big brown eyes. "Mom always comes home. That's another one of her rules." I calmed her down and gave her the food I had brought with me. I was in new territory and didn't know what to do. "Is there anyone you can stay with until your mom gets home?" I asked. She shook her head again, this time with a mouthful of peanut butter and jelly. I knew I couldn't leave her alone in the apartment, but if I called the police without a plan of action, they'd probably send her to foster care within a day and possibly take her away from her mother permanently if they decided she wasn't taking good enough care of the baby, which I already doubted. "How about we go to your apartment and leave your mom a note saying we're at my apartment? She can call me when she gets home and I'll bring you to her." I could see her wheels spinning. It was a violation of one of Mom's rules, but since Mom wasn't coming home, it was unlikely she wanted to spend the day alone in her apartment. Finally, she nodded in agreement. After gathering our things and stowing them in the car, the first thing we did was go to her apartment. We didn't pack anything in Maddie's apartment because there was just nothing to pack. The few articles of clothing she had, she was either wearing or they were lying amongst the dirty clothes waiting for their turn in the laundry room. I told her we would stop somewhere and I would buy her a few things, including a new toothbrush and comb. She smiled sadly. I left a note with my name and phone number on the middle of the small kitchen table, and then we went shopping for things for Maddie. I let her pick out a few tops and pairs of jeans, underwear, and socks at the nearest Dollar General store. While she seemed totally engrossed, I tried to figure out what I would do if her mom didn't get back quickly. We watched cartoons and the Disney Channel. I made us lunch and dinner and put her to bed at 9 o'clock in my spare room on the couch. The next day, I planned to call her into work and take a personal day to take care of some things. Maddie and I waited until lunchtime to go back to her apartment on Monday, but there was no sign that anyone had been there after the two of us the day before. I rummaged around the apartment a bit and found a drawer in her mother's dresser that contained papers. Among the useful items was Maddie's birth certificate, which I noticed didn't have her father's name on it. Her mother's name was Fiona Ruiz. I took the birth certificate along with a picture of Maddie and her mother. The picture was probably taken when Maddie was about 2 years old. She looked little more than a toddler. They were cuddling in front of the camera, Fiona looked to be in her early 20s and had the same long curly brown hair as Maddie. They were both smiling as they took the picture. And even though Fiona was a beautiful woman, there was still a tiredness and sadness in her eyes. I wondered if that look had gotten even sadder over the past few years. Maddie watched me carefully go through her mother's things. I tried to make light conversation with her and explain that I was looking for something that might help us find her mother. She seemed to accept this. When we got back to the apartment, I turned on the TV to the Disney Channel and put Maddie down and then went into the bedroom, called the police, and reported Fiona Ruiz missing. I didn't have much to say to the officer who took the call. Basically, I figured something must have happened to her for her to leave the baby alone. Is the child alone in the apartment right now, sir? The officer inquired. No, she's with me. I'm as close a friend as I can be to the child. I shall be glad to have her stay with me until things are settled. If you would agree to do that until Child Services contacts you, we'd appreciate it. I was worried about Maddie ending up in foster care. No one I knew who had been in foster care spoke well of the system. I knew I could do the right thing if I was allowed to keep her. As I pondered this, I remembered that my boss's wife, Darlene, has influential friends in the social services industry. Maybe I could extort a favor. I'd like to think my boss and I were on good terms. I worked for him for 20 years and did a hell of a job for his company. We always got along well on a personal level as well, and during my divorce, he and his wife supported me. Darlene Laster showed up at my apartment about 20 minutes after my conversation with her husband. She said she wanted to make a new friend. I introduced her to Maddie, and like the Pied Piper, Darlene charmed the girl in 5 minutes, and vice versa. When she left an hour later, I hugged her and promised her that she would do everything in her power to keep Maddie with me. That same afternoon, 2 policemen came to my apartment. They didn't hold out much hope of finding Fiona Ruiz. I gave them a copy of the picture of Maddie and her mom. On Tuesday, I went back to work, took Maddie with me, and enrolled her in our company's daycare center. Darlene helped organize it about 15 years ago. I never used it for my kids because Tracy stayed home until the kids were independent after school, but for me, a playful single dad, it was a godsend. At least until school started, I took Maddie to work with me in the morning, had lunch with her at noon, and took her home at night. All in all, everything was just fine. Having Maddie with me helped me come to terms with being abandoned by my own children. We rarely saw each other, and when we did, we usually just had dinner at one of the local restaurants. I didn't take Maddie with me when I went out with the kids, leaving her with my neighbor, Mrs. Olivares. They didn't need to show her how they felt about me. Maddie was a breath of fresh air for me. She and my mom hardly ever left the house due to lack of money. So a lot of what I did with Maddie was new to her. The first time we went to a real restaurant, not some McDonald's, she was mesmerized, like someone who had just come from another planet. When we went to the park and stopped to eat a pretzel and have a soda after she played on the playground, you'd think I was inviting her over for tea. I think she was smiling for a week after the first time. I know I smiled for a week after that, just listening to her talk about her experiences. She started teaching me Spanish. Apparently, she was bilingual and laughed a lot when I got words and phrases mixed up. Once at McDonald's, I ordered a horse meat and a Coke, and she laughed so hard she started crying. In her innocence, it never occurred to her that most people are not bilingual. I kept her in the same school where she went to first grade because it was easier for the school system. I had her birth certificate, so they didn't ask too many questions when I listed myself as her contact person and my apartment as her address. I never heard back from the police about Maddie's mother, nor from the social service agencies that wanted to set up custody of Maddie. Darlene must have twisted someone's arm in my favor, or the city officials decided they already had too many loose ends to worry about me and Maddie. My cooking skills also improved because when Maddie stayed with me, snacking on pizza and beer was unacceptable. So we started watching cooking shows on the Food Channel and cooking together in the kitchen. I had never done this with my kids because Tracy, I have to admit, was a great cook. But with my Maddie's help, I was learning and getting better, and we had a lot of fun in the kitchen. I'm not going to lie and say everything was perfect. We had our rifts and problems just like any other family, but that's just the way it is, just like any other family. We've only been together for a little over a year, and already Maddie and I have turned into our own version of a family. And it was pointed out to me at the school Maddie goes to at the beginning of 3rd grade. We were at the school's open house one night, and were walking down the hallway when one of Maddie's friends and her parents came over to say hello. Maddie's friend introduced her parents as my mom and dad, and then Maddie introduced me as her dad. I hadn't even thought of our family in those terms. And when she called me her dad, I nearly fainted with incredible joy upon hearing those words. I choked for a second, and I had to apologize to the Reynoldses for my momentary silence, saying I had a piece of snack stuck in my throat. Maddie caught it, looked at me askew, and squeezed my hand. She never called me Alex again, and nothing could please me more. I was having so much fun being a parent again that I hadn't even noticed I hadn't met her in over 2 years when Maddie brought it up at the grocery store one day. We were walking up and down the aisles, filling a cart with groceries from our shopping list, when a short woman walked past us in the produce department. I didn't pay much attention to it, but Maddie looked at the woman with redoubled intensity as we passed her. "Wow, Daddy, that's a very beautiful woman. You should ask her out," Maddie said. I was going through my shopping list when she made that statement, so I immediately stopped the cart and took a close look at the woman we had just walked past. She was beautiful. Then she looked up at me and we smiled embarrassedly at each other. "Well, aren't you going to say something to her, Daddy?" Maddie asked, looking at us. At this point, I wanted the floor to swallow me up, but hell, maybe this woman would give Maddie and I a pass, so I tried the good old-fashioned way. "Hi, I'm Alex, and this is Maddie. As you just heard, Maddie thinks I should ask you out on a date or something," I stammered. "What do you think?" she asked, looking me straight in the eye and bestowing me with $1 million smile. Ah! I was completely shocked. Caramel-colored skin, beautiful white teeth, a smile that could melt ice. And my heart. She looked to be about 5'2", 110, maybe 35 years old, and although she was wearing a light jacket, she seemed to have curves in all the right places and fit well in jeans. There was no ring on her left hand. I quickly wondered if Maddie had noticed that. "Would you like to have dinner with us one night? All of us. Or just you and me if you want." "Mueve suavemente, Romeo," Maddie said teasingly in Spanish. "It was a great move to ask your daughter to look for single women." "For you at the grocery store," the woman replied, while I blushed. "No, honestly, it wasn't my idea. I would never do that, honestly." "Yes, of course you would, Romeo. I'll buy that." "No, but yes, I'd like that. To have dinner with both of you. By the way, my name is Cherry Roberts." "Really? It was that easy?" "Damn, I should have used that guy a long time ago," I said, and she and I giggled. We made a date for the following Saturday. She said she loved Italian food, and Maddie and I had some good recipes for the occasion. After we exchanged phone numbers and I gave her my address, Maddie and I turned to continue shopping. As we turned the corner to the aisle, Maddie and I threatened each other with our fists. "Yeah, no setup, right?" She turned to us. Finally, the next Saturday came. I swear the days couldn't have stretched any slower. After cleaning the apartment, Maddie and I got busy making homemade lasagna, garlic breadsticks and salad, and homemade tortoni for dessert. Cooking calmed my nerves because, truth be told, I was nervous as a cat. After all, it had been over 20 years since my last date. And then it hit me. Hard. It had been 20 years since my last date. Of course, all of those last dates had been with Tracy, and I had to think hard to remember who I dated before Tracy and I got together. I think it might have been Marianne Rizzo. Last I heard about her, she married the guy she dated after me. I wondered if they were still married or if her marriage had evolved in the same direction as mine. "Take it easy, kid," I finally said to myself. "It's a date, just a damn date, and you're already thinking about marriage." It wasn't just me, but Maddie looked enthusiastic. She was by my side helping me as we cleaned up and then cooked. I had no idea that Cherry would be the first guest to come to our apartment who wasn't Mrs. Olivares, or older than about 10 years old. Dinner went well, it seemed to me. It was a little nerve-wracking at first, but the presence of an 8-year-old is a great icebreaker. "My mom wasn't married either. Were you married, Cherry?" she muttered, as I brought Cherry a glass of Galliano shortly after she arrived. Cherry blushed almost as much as I did at that question. Then she looked Maddie straight in the eye and said quietly, "I was once married to a wonderful man, baby, but that was in the past." I saw the sadness and then pain reflected on her face as she answered the question. "Daddy was married too, and he has 2 other children besides me," Maddie continued. At this point, I decided I'd rather tell Cherry in Reader's Digest format about my marriage, my divorce, and how I became Maddie's father. She took it all calmly, with a stoic expression on her face. Both she and Maddie cried a little when I moved on to the story of Maddie's mother not coming home. However, the sadness quickly passed for Maddie, who then asked Cherry about her name. "That's a cool name, Cherry. Your parents must have been fun when you were a kid." "Well, that's a pretty funny story, babe," Cherry replied. "Actually, my real name is Marcella, and for short I was called Sella. One day at the grocery store, my little brother saw a box of chocolate-covered cherries with the name Sella on them, and after that he started calling me Cherry. It caught on, and now everyone calls me that, so that's what I'm called too." "Well, it suits you a lot better than it suits Marcella," I cut in. "I see thick, dark-rimmed glasses, manly arms, and a firm ass." "Ooh, that's cruel," Cherry giggled back. "You will never ever call me by my first name." Cherry stayed with us until Maddie went to bed at 9. Then she said it was time for her to leave, too. I hope she wasn't just being polite when she said she had a good time and that next time we should spend that time at her apartment. I gave her a quick kiss on the lips as she walked out the door. For a brief moment, I thought I smelled arousal, but it had been so long that maybe I was just dreaming. "I like her, Daddy. I think she'll be good for us," Maddie said as I closed the door. I had to admit, at least to myself, that so far the kid was right. We had family playdates 5 Saturdays in a row, and I think we were all having a good time. However, I realized that I needed to try one-on-one time to see if it had any chance of success. Maddie took the news well when I told her that I was taking Cherry out to a restaurant, just the two of us, and that she would be spending the evening with Mrs. Olivares. I certainly wasn't going to leave Maddie home alone like her mother had done. I would never criticize Maddie's mother, but leaving an 8-year-old girl home alone while I went out on a date was not going to happen. Besides, I think Maddie and I were well aware that the last time she was left home alone, it didn't end well. I made reservations at a nice steakhouse for our first date alone, as Maddie called it. I knew the mood would be very different when I showed up at Cherry's door to pick her up. She was wearing a somewhat tight silk dress, open in the front, so her lush 36 solidars was clearly visible, and short enough to make her short legs seem a little longer. She was wearing a little more makeup than usual and was wearing a different perfume. Sexier and spicier, but not too strong. Damn, and I forgot to bring my stick. How the hell am I going to fight off all the other men? "If you think a silver tongue will help you succeed, well, you're probably right," she laughed back. We had a great dinner and enjoyed a more adult conversation without Maddie, although it was a little weird that she wasn't with me. "You miss her, don't you?" Cherry asked suddenly, looking me straight in the eye. "Sort of," I admitted. "Except for school and work, we're always together and I don't mind one bit." "You really miss the first two, don't you?" she asked. "Terribly. But not with the attitude I've had since I left. I know they're just kids, but they don't even try to see things from my point of view. My ex is really turning them against me." "I think you're good with kids," I continued. "If you're okay with it, how come you've never had kids?" "No, I don't mind. We were considering it at a time when I made the stupidest decision of my life. I disrespected and cheated on my husband, all for the thrill of illicit sex. I was a stupid bitch and ripped the heart out of the one person I cared about most in the world. That's a mistake I'll never make again if I ever get another chance to love someone like that again." Cherry's voice broke as she spoke the last sentence, but I caught every word she said in a barely audible whisper. Her eyes were full of tears, which she tried unsuccessfully to wipe away. I held out a tissue to her and she gently blotted her eyes. "I'm sorry if I made you go somewhere you didn't want to go," I said. "I've never talked to anyone about this before," she said. "Not even to my parents. I'm too ashamed of myself." "Okay, enough adult talk," I said. "Let's blow this joint and see if you know how to move on the dance floor, Missy." "Missy? How old do you think I am, 12? "Actually, I thought you were 35, but I'm 44, so you're still a baby to me," I said. "Really, 35?" she said in a satisfied voice. "I'm 42. I was married for 12 years, divorced 9 years ago. You have a very good effect on a girl's ego, sir." "It can't be. You're only 2 years younger than me. I look as if I might be your older brother," I laughed. I paid the bill, and we headed to the dance club that Tracy and I sometimes frequented. I'm no Fred Astaire, but Tracy loved to dance, So one of the first things I did when we had extra money was take a few dance lessons. I quickly realized that sitting on the sidelines and watching your wife dance with other men is not the most enjoyable thing to do. Cherry was as light on her feet as she was in her eyes. We danced to slow and fast music for about 30 minutes before I needed a break. Cherry looked like she could have kept going, but she got up off the floor with me and we found a free table to occupy. I headed for the bar, and no sooner had I stepped away from the table than the first vulture swooped in. I watched them with the corners of my eyes, trying not to be too conspicuous. I saw Cherry smiling and laughing. The vulture must have found it a little amusing, but she didn't move away from the table. I was more than pleased. She took a sip of her margarita as I held out the glass to her. Soon, vulture number 2, a guy about 25 years old, appeared. He acknowledged my presence but still turned to Cherry and asked if she wanted to dance. Sorry, Slick, but I have a lady with me. I don't like to be disrespected, especially by children. I spoke softly but firmly, keeping a smile on my face. However, the smile didn't appear in my eyes, and the guy obviously realized he had broken protocol. Sorry, dude, I didn't realize you guys were dating, he muttered before slipping away. We finished our drinks and went back to the dance floor, staying there for about 30 more minutes. Another guy tried to cut in, but he had the good sense to ask me first. When I told him no, he took it normally, held out his hand and said, "You can't blame a guy for trying. She's great." We went back to the table and had another drink. As we were finishing up, another vulture snuck up on us and asked permission to dance with Cherry. I was tired, but decided that if she still wanted to dance, I would let her come out. She shook her head, and I gave him the bad news. I drove her home and she suggested I come over to her place for a bit. It was only 10:30 and I agreed. We had a glass of wine each and talked easily for another hour. At that point, I got up and she got up with me. I wasn't sure how to close the deal, and I must have looked like the proverbial deer in headlights because she giggled, and it made me feel good to listen to her. I blushed thickly, and she realized I was in big trouble. "Don't worry, Alex. We're in no hurry to get anywhere, are we?" she cooed. 2 weeks later in my bedroom, I broke my streak of 0 scores in 2 years. It wasn't something wild and crazy because Maddie was asleep in the next room, but it felt so good. I didn't last long, but Cherry seemed to be okay with that because before I got mine, I made sure she got hers. When we both got up to eat breakfast, she went into my closet and came out of there wearing a white shirt that covered the bare essentials but still looked incredibly sexy. We headed into the kitchen where we were soon joined by Maddie, who let out a squeal when she saw that Cherry was still with us. She ran up to her and threw herself into Cherry's arms, nearly knocking her to the floor. They hugged each other tightly, and both seemed genuinely happy to be in each other's arms. It was almost funny, and I rolled my eyes looking at the couple. "Pancakes! Pancakes!" they shouted in unison. "Chocolate chip pancakes!" I yelled back. 6 months later, Cherry moved in for good, and we became the 21st century version of the Brady Bunch. Even though I was still paying child support, I was making decent money. And Cherry was working at an accounting firm and making good money too. Maddie didn't lack for money, though she didn't ask for much. I guess when you grow up without much, almost anything can seem like a lot. I guess everything is relative. And while we may have been the modern version of the Brady family, I think we looked like the modern version of the odd couple. In this case, the odd trio. We were black, white, and Hispanic, and we each had a different last name. Some of these problems were solved when I enrolled Maddie in 4th grade in the fall. I enrolled her as Maddie Ruiz Rogers. She was with me when I registered her, and her eyes got big when she saw what I had written. She didn't say anything until we got out of school, and then she practically exploded. "I can be Rogers like you? Really?" she squeaked. "Not legally, at least not for a few more years," I replied. "But according to Rogers' rules, you can join the club." I put the word Rogers' rules in quotes, but that didn't deter Maddie in the least. She jumped into my arms and kissed my cheeks. After 30 seconds of celebration, Maddie pulled away and gave me a cold stare. I was a little dumbfounded until she spoke. "When can Cherry be Rogers?" she asked. "You know, that's a really good question. I'm going to have to give it some serious thought." And I meant it. In fact, on the anniversary of our first date, I asked Maddie to stay with Mrs. Olivares while I went to the jeweler. I was buying gifts for Tracy from after work. Cherry said she'd be home late and would be eating dinner alone, so I figured I had a couple hours to find the right ring. It was a little after 6 when I walked out of Jean Horowitz's jewelry store, having just conceptualized a custom engagement ring with Jean's daughter, Jolene. After ordering pizza for Maddie, Mrs. Olivares, and me, I drove to my favorite pizza place located in a small shopping center. As soon as I stepped out of the car, I cast a glance at the small but fashionable diner located just a few steps away, and then my world ended for the second time. My Cherry entered the restaurant under the arm of a handsome 40-year-old black guy. She looked lively and very happy. I stared after them, unable to move, or breathe, or think. I don't know how long I sat in the car before I realized I hadn't breathed in a while and felt like I was going to pass out. I took a deep breath, then another. Then I decided I needed to feed Maddie, so I walked into the pizza place and placed my order. I drove home in a stupor. I don't remember much about that evening, at least not until Cherry got home around 8. She was still animated and seemed to be in a great mood when she walked in the door. "Hi, you'll never guess who I ran into tonight. My brother John snuck into town without telling me, and after I finished work, he invited me over for dinner. I figured since you guys were eating pizza, it wouldn't hurt for me to grab a bite with him." She stopped talking when she saw the look on my face. "Is that the story you want to tell?" I asked quietly. Cherry looked shocked as the reality of my words replayed in her brain. "You went to Salvatore's for pizza today. And you saw me with him, didn't you? And you thought, 'You son of a bitch,'" she shouted at me. I was more than surprised. I had expected guilt and remorse, but not the attack. This must be some new way to apologize, I thought to myself. Cherry had never swore at me before, but I was beginning to realize she might have a good reason. "You don't even trust me enough to ask questions, you bastard. I know I lost my husband because I cheated on him. I told you about it. I didn't hide anything. And I told you I would never make that mistake again. I realize your ex-wife still has trust issues, but those are your issues with her. Don't you dare treat me so disrespectfully again, or I'll be out of here so fast it'll make your head spin." Mrs. Olivares must have quietly walked out when Cherry exploded, and I watched Maddie slip away to her room. I wanted the couch I was sitting on to swallow me, but it didn't happen. "You're right," I said quietly. "I let the distrust Tracy planted in my mind spill over into you. You're a separate entity, and if I can't realize that, then it's my fault, and I don't deserve you." I wasn't going to tell her about the ring just yet, but after screwing up so badly, I had to play my best card. She grinned. "If looks could kill, I guess I wouldn't be walking the earth anymore. So, I know this probably isn't the best time to do this, but I need to show you how much I care about you. Give me your left hand." She slowly walked over to me and held out her hand palm up. I turned it palm down, placed the piece of paper on her ring finger, and secured it with a rubber band from my shirt pocket. She looked puzzled, to say the least. "What the?" she said, as she took the paper from her fingers, unfolded it, and began to read. "You lousy asshole," she squealed. "Really?" Cherry then sank her lips into mine in the most passionate kiss I'd ever received, including anything Tracy had ever done. When we were done, she called Maddie to come out of her room. "Look, baby, look," she said to Maddie, holding out the check for the ring. "I'm going to be Rogers, too." The squealing laughter of several joyous women sounded too loud for the men to hear, but I managed to stay on my feet as they bounced around the room. When they dispersed, Cherry pressed a button on her cell phone and exclaimed loudly, "You better get over here and meet your future son-in-law." Maddie went and returned Mrs. Olivares so Cherry could show off her ring, and the apartment was still in Christmas excitement when Cherry's brother showed up. He was as handsome a man as Cherry was a beautiful woman. Looking at him, I couldn't even thank myself that he was her brother and not a fan like I thought. We shook hands while Cherry introduced us, but then he reached forward and enclosed me in a bear hug. "Handshakes are for friends, and I want us to stay friends, and hugs are for family," he said. "They're also to show you that if you hurt her, I'll beat the life out of you. Got it?" Saying the last sentence, he squeezed her even tighter. My breath caught, and I realized what he was talking about. "Uh-huh," I whispered back to him. Cherry briefly told him what happened when I gave her the ring. He looked at me with mock surprise, I think he was, and said he was glad I was still alive. "She looked at you with a laser death stare, didn't she?" John asked. "Yeah, she was killing people with that look." Both Maddie and Mrs. Olivares noted that they had the good sense to leave the room when they saw that look. He then turned to Maddie, looked her over from head to toe and said, "So, this is the famous Maddie Rogers. I've always wanted to have nephews and nieces. I think you'd be a great fit." Maddie smiled shyly and then her face lit up like a sunny day. "Does that mean I can call you Mom?" she asked Cherry. Cherry didn't answer, crying. She reached for Maddie and they stood in each other's arms for a long time, each crying for a different reason. Even with Darlene's help, the state made us wait until Maddie was 16 before we could legally adopt her. By then, she could file for emancipation and go off on her own. But neither Cherry nor I worried about that happening. The state merely sanctioned what Maddie, Cherry, and I had created years before. Family isn't always about blood and legal documents. And then, out of the blue, I hadn't heard a word from either of my kids since we'd last met over 6 years ago, so I was more than surprised when Haley was on the other end of the line. I didn't bother looking at the caller ID and just answered the phone with my usual, "Alex Rogers." "Daddy, it's me, Haley," she spoke quickly. "Please don't hang up." "Relax, baby. I'll never hang up on you or your brother. Is something wrong?" "No, Daddy. Everything's fine, just fine. I'm getting married next month and I want to invite you to the wedding." I think I was as shocked as anyone else. This was my little girl, and I was so removed from her life that I hadn't even met the man she was about to marry in just a month. The last time I talked to my kids was right after Ethan's 16th birthday. We went to Ethan's favorite restaurant for his birthday. As usual, none of the kids were particularly talkative, despite my repeated attempts. Finally, right after we ordered dessert, Ethan came out with it. "Dad, I'm 16 now, and court-ordered visitation is over. Haley and I don't have to see you anymore if we don't want to. We've talked it over and we don't want to see you. You abandoned us to preserve your stupid pride. Well, you can take your pride and shove it up your ass." I have to hand it to my son. He was a great customer. Although he couldn't look me in the eye when he talked to me, he never raised his voice. Haley, for her part, shifted her gaze from Ethan to me and back again. I sighed, expecting it to happen at some point. This was Tracy's work. It had her fingerprints all over it. "I assume you realize what wedding vows are, and that your mother not only broke ours, but threw them in my face. But she has apparently convinced you both that I'm a bad guy, and nothing I say will change your mind. But for me, breaking my wedding vows isn't something I can just turn a blind eye to, like, say, breaking down the family car. It's about my soul. And while I knew that my leaving would hurt you too, staying would be even worse because it would crush my soul and make me not the person I am. We won't be the same anymore. And you'll realize that when you grow up and live enough to see things for what they really are. That was your mother's mistake, and she did a good job of putting the blame on me. Well, I won't take the blame, if that's what you both want." Dad, Haley said, bringing me back to the present. "Don't you want to come with me?" "I really do, Haley, kid. You know, I've even set aside money for the day it happens," I replied. You don't have to worry about money, Daddy. Bob will take care of it." "Bob?" I asked. "Wild guess, but we're talking about Robert Goldstein III, aren't we?" There was a note of irritation in her voice, then it was replaced by pity. "You didn't know then, apparently. Mom married Bob about 6 years ago, after we stopped seeing you," she said. "That bastard ruined my marriage, ruined my relationship with my kids, half ruined me financially, and then married my ex-wife. All because of my pride, Haley? Every time my son wants to apologize to me. Don't be like that, Dad. I'm not inviting you over to cause trouble. You're not going to give me away. You're not going to sit in front of the whole family. I just want you there, okay?" "Okay, Haley. On one small condition. That I can bring my family with me." "Your family?" "Yeah. Even a loser like me has a family, Haley. I have a wonderful wife and an amazing daughter. You'll love them both if you spend any time with them." It was Haley's turn to be surprised. I had never told her or Ethan about Cherry and Maddie. Honestly, I didn't want their mother to know. "You have another child? Does she know about me and Ethan?" she asked almost serenely. "Maddie is 16 years old. She was adopted. She and I have been together for 9 years. I almost literally found her on the street. She knows everything about you, too, about what we once had, and what we don't have anymore. She's fun and full of life. She's had her setbacks, too, and we were there for each other during a very difficult time in our lives. Almost like a script." Well then, I look forward to meeting the rest of the family, Haley said after recovering from the shock. The wedding took place on Saturday night in a rather posh setting, as befitted the daughter of a successful lawyer. You had to hand it to old Bob. He didn't skimp on his stepdaughter. The service itself was held in a beautiful old church in town. The girls and I timed it so that we got there right before the service started and sat in the last row. Yes, I noticed old friends and family, but by getting there right before the service, we didn't have to socialize beforehand. And when Haley and Mark led the procession out of the church, I got a kiss on the forehead. We arrived at the reception in time enough to get a table in the back of the hall, which, truth be told, wasn't fair to Cherry and Maddie, who had a girls' spa day on Friday, and then both bought new dresses. Cherry's was slinky and sexy, and Maddie looked 16 when she first applied full makeup. Any father's nightmare. But they both respected my wishes and didn't complain when we sat down at the table after I stopped by the bar for a glass of wine for Cherry and me and a Coke for Maddie. As I expected, various friends from the old days started stopping by the table to say hello and chat as soon as they spotted me. Then Tracy's parents, Rhonda and William, walked in. Rhonda cried as soon as she leaned in for a kiss. William hugged me even tighter than when Tracy and I were married. I introduced Cherry and Maddie. Rhonda and Bill looked a little awkward, but it was understandable. I'd been married to their daughter for 18 years. Since I had no say and wasn't paying for the evening, I didn't think it was right to move around and work the crowd, so to speak. So the girls and I mostly stayed at the table as people approached us. But I'm no fool, and I saw the reactions of many people who knew me to the presence of a gorgeous black woman and a Latina princess, especially the reactions of the wives of former friends. You'd think I'd brought a trophy wife to the party. And just at that moment, Tracy and Bob, our hospitable hosts, showed up. Being married to someone for almost 20 years, you can understand all the nuances of their personality. And from the first moment Tracy saw Cherry, I knew she didn't like her. Maybe Cherry was too black? Maybe. Maybe Cherry was too pretty? Maybe. Could Cherry have had a flat stomach, great legs, and looked 10 years younger than her years? Definitely. Could Cherry, with everything she had, have just ended up with the one single unfaithful guy in the room? Hell yes. Because of everything that was going on in her head with Cherry, Tracy didn't even pay much attention to the fact that we were seeing each other up close for the first time in 10 years. She almost literally flinched when I moved over and kissed her cheek in greeting. "Oh, Alex, I'm sorry. I was having a little trouble navigating in those new heels," she apologized. "That's okay, babe. You look amazing," I lied. "Come on, let's go meet the new family." I introduced Cherry, Maddie, Tracy, and Bob, shook Bob's hand as warmly as I could, and introduced him as the instrument of my future good fortune. Everyone but Maddie flinched when I said that, but my daughter threw me a sly look and squeezed my left elbow. Did I mention this kid is perceptive? We chatted for about 5 minutes, saying nothing, until Tracy and Bob stepped away and the bride and her new husband approached us. When Tracy and Bob left, Maddie shook her head slightly, showing that she was no more happy to see them than I was. My second daughter, my fiancée, greeted me much warmer than I expected. She hugged me tightly and started crying, while my new son-in-law, Cherry, and Maddie stood silently by my side. I was completely stunned by this and didn't know what to say when she finally let go of me. "I'm sorry, Daddy, for everything," she whispered. "I didn't realize what you were getting at until I repeated my own vows about 2 hours ago. As soon as I said my vows, it was like I was slapped in the face with what you went through when your mom cheated on you and broke her vows. I never understood. I blamed you and your damn pride, and so did Ethan. And now I get it. Completely. You were absolutely right to do what you did, and she was absolutely wrong to not only do what she did, but to take it out on you. How can I make up for the pain Ethan and I caused you?" A lump the size of a soccer ball rose in my throat. I hadn't cried since I tore cartilage in my knee playing soccer in 10th grade, but I was damn close to it, standing here with my family gathered around me. "How about you introduce me first to that handsome stallion you said your vows to, and then do me the honor and dance?" I replied. "Oh yes, of course," she said, somewhat embarrassed. "You haven't met the man of my dreams yet. Mark Westinghouse, meet your second father-in-law, Alex Rogers, my real father." We shook hands sincerely, and then I did my fatherly duty and threatened him with my life if he ever hurt my daughter. I introduced him and Haley to Cherry and Maddie, and while everyone was getting acquainted, the orchestra played. "Daddy?" Haley asked, tilting her head toward the dance floor. Enchanted, I said, taking her hand. The crowd, which had started to buzz even louder when Haley greeted me, buzzed even louder when I escorted Haley to the dance floor. At this point, I realized I was starting to lose ground to Tracy and Bob, but I had many more years to catch up. The band played what I like to call children's music, and although I can't stand it, I knew how to dance to it, thanks to being married to a goddess who loves to dance. Haley was shocked that her newfound father turned out to be such a Renaissance man, and we actually lasted 2 songs. By then, most of the audience had gathered around the two of us. When the second song ended, Haley gave me another big hug. The audience applauded, and Cherry and Maddie were waiting for me with bright smiles on their faces. I took their hands and pulled them to the floor behind me, and the three of us sang our song, and everyone else joined us. "Look at you, Mr. Rhythm," Cherry said in my ear, stepping closer. "Who knew giving your daughter away in marriage could be so much fun?" I told her, quickly turning to Maddie. "But let's wait a few more years. I'm not sure my heart can take that kind of fun." "Turn me around, old man," Maddie smiled back. All three of us stayed on the floor for another 6 songs, then I left my girls, went to the bar to get an ice jack, and sat down at my table to relax. I watched Cherry and Maddie enjoying the dance floor and didn't notice Tracy come over and sit next to me at the table. She touched my shoulder and I immediately knew whose touch it was. "This was supposed to be our day, not mine and Bob's," Tracy said, leaning in close to my ear. "You threw 18 good years away for what? Obviously you didn't love me enough." I didn't turn my head in her direction once. "No, obviously you didn't love me enough not to do it at all, especially since I told you what would happen if you did. You didn't love me enough or respect me enough. But you got Bob as a result of the deal, and he's a pretty good catch, I'd say. And I got Cherry and Maddie. To quote the Rolling Stones, you can't always get what you want, but if you try really hard, you can find what you need." "You were a jerk then, you're a jerk now." "Maybe. But I'm a lucky jerk who hasn't lost a minute of sleep because of your bad decision. And no, I wasn't expecting an apology. I'm fine." Ethan came back into my life when he started a serious relationship with a woman a few years ago. It seems that fidelity is much easier to understand when you're in the game, so to speak. He called me out of the blue and said we needed to talk, so I invited him over to the apartment. When I opened the door, he was carrying a bottle of Jack Daniel's Tennessee Honey. "Haley said you're really into that kind of stuff and thought I should bring you a peace offering," he said as I led him into the apartment. We'd only talked a little bit at Haley's wedding, and even then on shaky ground. That was over 2 years ago, and while Haley and I had made up, Ethan hadn't. I asked my girlfriend Sasha to be my wife, and it got me thinking about you and Mom. Haley has been telling me for a couple years now that the injured party in this case was you, not Mom. But I didn't realize that until Sasha and I had the big talk, and that included our feelings about fidelity. "I'm sorry, Dad. I was a complete idiot. I realize that now. I just didn't mean to hate Mom." "I never asked you and Haley to pick sides," I replied. "I just wanted you to know why I had to leave." Ethan and I talked about a lot of things over the next few hours, finishing off a bottle of whiskey. Cherry made a great dinner for all of us, and the four of us got to work. Ethan fell asleep on the couch in the living room because Cherry wouldn't let him drive his car after he shared a bottle of liquor with me. At this wedding, Cherry, Maddie, and I sat at the groom's family table, along with pregnant Haley and Mark and our first grandchild, 2-year-old Brent, who sat next to Tracy. That way, Tracy at least didn't feel left out because she was alone now. Bob had kicked her to the curb in favor of a trophy wife about a year ago. The kids kept me informed of Tracy's progress, giving me news about her from time to time. I told them both that there was no need for Tracy and I to keep in touch. We were adults, and if either of us wanted the other to know something, they could pick up the phone. Maddie flew in for the wedding. She is a freshman at the University of Michigan, but didn't want to miss her older brother's wedding and flew in with him. She, Ethan, and Haley have developed a strong relationship, so much so that they can banter with her saying she's my favorite kid. I find it very interesting to watch the three of them together. The argument that nurture is more important than nature when it comes to raising children seems to apply to us, because Maddie and I have an unbreakable bond that even Cherry has noted. While I wouldn't wish what we went through in our early childhood on anyone, adversity has made us a little closer than we might otherwise have been. Perhaps adversity has helped Cherry and me as well. We both know that you can never take anything for granted, and we cherish the time we spent together while we sort out our new life as single parents. I can tell you that it didn't take Cherry long to realize that an empty nest means no one in the next room is overhearing anything, and she's loosened up a bit in the bedroom. Her cries of pleasure drive me crazy and make me want to please her even more. There are mornings when we both go to work a little stiff and sore after a raucous night of play. When all the usual wedding reception hassle was over, Cherry and I headed to the dance floor. Maddie danced with one of Ethan's groomsmen too, but not before Ethan warned her not to mess with my father's favorite child, or she'd have to pay. I grinned when he said that. After half a dozen dances, I started to head back to the table, but Maddie wanted to dance with me, so I stayed for one more. I noticed that Cherry and Tracy had nothing to say to each other, even though they were sitting within talking distance. "Do you feel a chill coming from across the room?" Maddie asked, finding herself at a conversational distance. Insightful. When I finally returned to the table, Cherry stood up and joined Maddie on the dance floor. A moment later, I felt a touch on my shoulder. Obviously, we've moved on to round two, I thought. "Aren't you going to gloat about Bob dumping me?" Tracy asked, leaning toward him. "Not my circus, not my monkeys," I replied. "I know this will probably surprise you, but I rarely think about you at all. I don't wish you harm, but I don't care about your life and what happens to it. We spent 18 wonderful years together, and that was many years ago. I have a new life now, and I don't want to spend time thinking about the past or what could have been." While we had been talking, I had been watching the dance floor and now turned to face Tracy. And then I saw her fear of living her retired life alone. It was another factor she apparently hadn't considered all these years because she thought I certainly wouldn't give up in the face of her threats to ruin my life in a divorce. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I realized that she would have tried to crush my soul if the roles in this conversation had been reversed. "You know I was an asshole back then, and I still am," I said, getting up from the table and joining my girls on the dance floor. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.